Banks Edmiston, the first African-American flight attendant for a commercial airline in United States history, will make her very first appearance on The Shanwag Show, Monday, June 29th, 2020 at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. Hello, and welcome to the Shanwag Show. I'm your hostess, Shanice Wagner. Today is June 29th, 2020, and I'm so excited about finally having the opportunity to interview the one and only Pat Banks Edmiston. Let's give it up wherever you are for Pat Banks Edmiston. She is the very first African-American flight attendant to work on a commercial aircraft in United States history. Good afternoon, Pat. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing fine. You look great. You sound wonderful.
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you.
When was your last Taekwondo class or your last karate class?
Oh, my last karate class was Sunday morning.
Okay, so gosh, she's 83 years young. Isn't she lovely? And she became a black belt when she was 62, and she hails from New York, New York. So before we even get into the history you made, tell us about the weather in New York. How's everybody feeling? How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing good. Kind of stuck in the house, but with the Zoom classes with the Master Abdul Musawir, it really works well because it sort of takes your mind off of things. It keeps you healthy, you're moving. And I'm also studying the Chinese bow staff. And my partners, Adim and George Shallow, we worked out for the first time last week in the park, and that was just absolutely fantastic. So we will be doing that every Tuesday and Wednesday in the park now, without a mask on.
With your mask on. And which park are you working out in?
And St. Nicholas Park on 131st Street in Harlem.
Okay, in Harlem. So what part of New York do you reside in?
I live in the Bronx, right on the concourse.
Okay, but you're originally from Harlem, correct?
Born and raised in Harlem.
Wow, like born and raised in Compton, born and raised in Harlem.
Yeah, born and raised in Harlem. Loved it. It was Harlem.
You have such a wonderful story. So I think, let's start with Harlem. Let's start with what life was like in Harlem and what led you to want to become a flight attendant to begin with. Let's talk about childhood.
Okay, in Harlem. Harlem was always a wonderful place to live. And I can remember I was born in the Harlem River Projects on 7th Avenue, near the 155th Street Bridge. And I often reflect back to that because we were little kids and we could go out and play. Our parents didn't have to be with us. It was magnificent. And then the coding changed on housing, and they developed what they call city housing with rent guidelines and income. And so we had to move to Riverton. But that story, Metropolitan Life Insurance had built Stuyvesant Town and Parkchester for whites. Black politicians confronted Metropolitan Life, and they ended up building the Riverton houses, which is in central Harlem, for Black people. Doesn't that tell you something? Even back then, they were separating us. But it was a wonderful place to grow up. We had wonderful families there, and basically it was all Blacks and sort of middle income. You had your doctors, your lawyers, your civil workers. They all lived in Riverton. So that's where I basically grew up.
Okay.
In that housing development.
And tell me about school, because you were talking about what your experience was like being the only Black at a particular campus.
I went to a grammar school at St. Mark the Evangelist in Harlem. And I had a nun who really fell in love with my sister and myself and another friend of mine, Faye Young. When we got to the 8th grade, she wanted us to go to one of the best high schools in the state. So she recommended that we go to this school called Aquinas Academy. Now, Aquinas Academy, at the time we arrived at Aquinas Academy, it was only one Black girl in the school. When my sister Faye and I arrived, I mean, it was an amazing experience, but the simple reason that I don't think anyone in the school had experience with Black children or Black youngsters.
And what year was this when you went there?
1951.
Okay.
Yeah, 1951, because I graduated in 1955. So the students had not been exposed to Blacks. The teachers had not been exposed to Blacks. And we had, I remember, we stuck together like thick and thin because we had to sort of protect ourselves. I had a teacher who stopped me in the hallway, a lay teacher, and she tried to tell me that I was born in Yemen. And I kept telling her, I was born in Harlem. What are you talking about? And she would tell me, oh no, oh no, oh no, you were born in Yemen. It was that racist thing because I was a fair-skinned Black, I guess you would call it. Mm-hmm. I had a nun who taught religion. And every time I would walk into this nun's class, she would start talking about the bars and churches on the corners of Harlem. I had students who would ask us all kinds of crazy questions. I remember I had a young lady in my class and she said to me, my uncle told me that you people put a lot of grease in your hair to keep it down. And I said to her, why don't you put your hands in my hair? And she did. I said, do you feel any grease? She said, no. I said, then go home and tell your uncle I said he's a goddamn liar. My feelings about racism from the time I was a little girl, and I would read articles about the South, a bathroom for Negroes, a bathroom for whites, the lynchings and the inability of our people to function in the South as a little girl. So now here I'm going through this in high school. And even before, I would walk down the street and people would tell me I'm Puerto Rican. I'd say, no, ma'am, I'm a Negro. As a child, I dealt with this racist environment in New York City. So there we can go on because it existed and people didn't realize how subtle racism was until you actually had to confront it as a Black person. Well, so I got a good beginning with that stuff.
I know in the South, you know, we always had the impression that in the North, you know, it was a much better place. You know, there was a huge migration and exodus of Blacks from the South to the North, but it was just, I hear it was more subtle up North. Now, you know that you do have some idea of your family, some of your family coming from France. Tell me about that.
My family history on my mom's side, we're the Noisette family. My history goes to a white doctor in France who was invited to the Medical Institute in Haiti. He was a botanist. In Haiti, he married a young woman named Celeste. They left Haiti during Toussaint's revolution.
And she was African.
Pardon me?
Celeste was African.
She was Haitian, yes, yes. Okay. African, yes, African blood, because you know, well, I can explain that history later, but they went to Charleston. When I went to Africa in 2005, and I went to the slave house on Goree Island, the slaves were thrown into the water in Goree Island. So the slaves would land on many of the Caribbean islands. So the African heritage hit many of those islands. So of course, Celeste, yes, was African. So that's where our African heritage comes in through Haiti. And they went to Charleston, North Carolina. And they resided there. And of course, they had 2 children and his children became his slaves. Upon his death, they were freed.
Wow. But he married Celeste.
Yes.
He made his children his slaves, I guess, for their protection, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. If he married her, I mean,
They
there's
were married in Haiti. They were
Mhm.
married in
Right.
Haiti, and I guess the only reason they left Haiti was to avoid the Toussaint revolution in Haiti.
What about you?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So
So
there's a lot of history in Charleston, but that would take us another period of talk because I have
right,
quite history with the Noisette family in
right.
Charleston.
So
And they're all over the world. There
yeah,
is a very large history of the Noisette family all over the world.
you were very fair as a result, and you knew where your European heritage came from. You knew that it was from France.
Yes.
So you're here, you're in New York, you're going to school, and I guess when you were a teenager and all your friends are deciding what their career choices will be, your heart was set on being a flight attendant to travel. Tell me why.
Well, that happened in high school. I was attending, no, it happened after high school. I'm sorry. It happened in college. I was attending Queens College. We had moved to Long Island at that time. I was in college. I was a psychology major at Queens College. And I got this magazine, Glamour Magazine. Now, that was the greatest magazine back in the day, Glamour Magazine. And I saw an article in Glamour Magazine talking about airline hostesses, flight attendants, if you'd like to call it that. And I thought it was at the Grace Downs Air Career School in Midtown in New York. And that just sounded exciting to me. I said, you know, we don't travel that much. I was a New Yorker, my family were New Yorkers, and I used to get a little upset when I was little because most of my friends had family in the South. So when you had school breaks, the kids would all go south, but I was always stuck in New York City because my family was all New York at that time. And so I saw this article and I said, you know, it would be great to get a job like this and fly. I would be willing to leave school for a little while and just travel the world. So I applied to the Grace Downs Air Career School in 1956. They accepted me to the school. I went through all the training in the school. I got a 95 average. And when the interviews began, the first interview I had was with Mohawk Airlines. The second interview was with TWA. The third interview was with Capital Airlines. Nothing was occurring. I was getting no responses from any of the airlines, which was puzzling to me because I was young, I was pretty cool, I was okay. And one of the
you interviewed, what year was this?
in 1956.
Got it.
That's when I was at the school. Okay. And of course, upon completion, the interviews occurred. One of the chief hostesses for one of the airlines saw me standing outside, and she said to me, Pat, I hate to see you go through this. She said, airlines do not hire Negroes. Well, that was like a spark bomb going off in me because I said, New York City? I can't get hired? It was crazy. So I had a friend of mine, Fred Weaver, who was Commissioner of Housing. He lived in Riverton. And we used to call him Pop. And I called Pop and I said, Pop, they're not going to hire me because I'm a Negro. So he immediately reacted. He set up an interview with me with Clayton Powell. And Clayton Powell, in turn, referred me to the New York State Commission Against Discrimination. And they took the case. My statute of limitation legally had run out against Mohawk and TWA, but Capital Airlines was still active and the statute of limitations had not run out. So the commission took the case. Investigations began in all airlines. Mohawk was investigated. There was a very, very intense investigation now in personal records. It started with Mohawk, it started with TWA, and it also involved Capital Airlines. Capital Airlines stated to the commission that New York State had no jurisdiction over them because they were based in Alexandria, Virginia. However, because they came to the Grace Downs Air Career School in New York to interview young ladies, New York State did have jurisdiction over Capital Airlines. During the investigations, TWA interviewed a young lady Margaret Grant. That was in around May of 1957. Miss Grant could not be hired because for personal reasons. In December of 57, Mohawk got scared as well and hired Carol Taylor. Carol Taylor's flight did not stay long. She left in about 2 or 3 months. This was a regional carrier, you know, and a regional carrier just went from like New York to Boston or things like that. So it really never hit the paper with that one. It never hit the papers really with TWA either. Through my investigations during our fight with the commission, we found out this information. So the 2 attorneys, Solomon Heifetz, a white attorney, and Mary Brown, a black attorney, pursued the case against Capital Airlines.
Wow. So it was because of your fight, the fight in you, and your pursuit of this legally is what had them shaking in their pants and resulted in their even hiring the other African-American female, but her career was short-lived, only 2 or 3 months. And so, but she wasn't hired for a commercial airline. So as a result of the investigation, what happened? What led to your being hired? How did it all unfold, and how did you feel when it happened?
Well, actually, the racism in the airline industry was so subtle. People didn't even realize that blacks were not hired in flight. They were hired with ground duties, not in flight. So several radio stations, several newspapers picked up the information. So of course the word got out about the racism in the airline industry. It was all over the world. I mean, I received letters and all kinds of prayers and whatnot from people all over the world. It was amazing that no one ever realized that the airlines there were no black pilots and there were no black flight attendants at all. My case went to court in 1960. It was a very extensive, the report of the case was very extensive. I can't go into depth about every part of the court procedure, but in February of 1960, now racism and discrimination was very difficult to prove. But the commission felt at this time we had enough evidence because of their investigations into several airlines and finding no personal records that showed there were any blacks in flight. That's when they went to court and felt we could win. And yes, we did. In February of 1960, the court was ordered for Capital Airlines to hire me or it would go to the Supreme Court. So we won, girl, we won. You know, I was intent to stick with this. It was a long, drawn out couple of years, but I was raised as a very proud Black woman. And through my experiences of reading of what was happening to Black people in the South, I would never allow this to happen. I think Black people, even today, we have to fight for what we want. We can't back off because society says we can't. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
One of your, now, and I was so shocked when you told me this, but you told me that one of your biggest support systems was an icon, Malcolm X.
Yes.
And you said
yes.
that you knew Malcolm, he was your friend. And can you just tell me about what it was like, how you came to know Malcolm, and where you were when he was killed?
Okay, when I was in college, I wrote a paper on the mosque, and it had just come to New York around 1956. And I met with Brother Farrakhan and had an interview with him. And I know people were saying, I don't know if you should write this paper. I don't think you should write this paper.
So Brother Farrakhan, Louis Farrakhan. You mean Brother Louis Farrakhan?
Yes.
Okay.
Who was the head of the Islam movement at that time. I wrote the paper and I got an A on that paper in college because the paper was very explicit on Farrakhan's attitude about racism and Black people and white people. I met Malcolm during the interview, and we became friends later on during my fight to open up the airlines to Blacks. I was visiting a friend years later at Presbyterian Hospital, and there was a murder. I didn't know who or what. The hospital was closed off, but when I returned home, I was informed by phone that Malcolm had been murdered.
And Presbyterian Hospital was right across the street from the mosque.
It was across from a hall. I can't remember the name of the hall.
Shot.
That's years ago where he was.
You were right across the street from where he was speaking.
Yes, he was murdered. Yes.
He was murdered. And then the hospital shut down, you said? You didn't know what was
the hospital shut down for a long time because they didn't know whether the person that committed the murder had gone into the hospital, but that's a usual legal procedure when there's an incident like that close by.
And how did that affect you when you got home to know that your friend had been shot and killed and you would never hear his voice again or hear words of encouragement that he offered to you during your fight?
Well, it was very difficult because this again showed me, and this was after the airline case. This was after. I had left the airline by then, but this was after. And it was difficult. It was very difficult because he was a very good person. And I belonged to a group called Just Us. And we had done a benefit for Sister Betty Shabazz during that time.
That's history. Now tell me about once you heard the ruling that Capitol had to hire you, because, you know, some people try to say, oh, well, you know, slavery ended in, you know, in the 1800s. They don't understand we went from there to Jim Crow and we had other battles to fight. You know, we entered this particular year. They don't understand that the struggle does not end. It recommences. Tell me about your experiences becoming a flight attendant, the good, the bad, and the ugly. What was it like working for Capital Airlines?
Well, I went into this with a very open mind. I had to unclutter in my mind, and I learned through the Book of Five Rings that my mind had to be uncluttered in order for me to proceed in a very positive way. So I emptied out all the problems, all the racist kind of things, and I went at this with a very open mind because that was the only way that I was going to deal with anything in a very positive manner. Capital Airlines was a Southern airline. It flew south. I was based in Detroit, Michigan at Willow Run Airport. I lived with some friends there, but my flights were mostly Southern flights. We did fly up north sometimes. I remember flying up to Minnesota. I'll never forget that. I'll share that with you later. But my first flight, I think, was to Little Rock, Arkansas. And now back then, Little Rock, Arkansas was having some problems. And there was a lot of going on with I think it was the Little Rock, Arkansas 9 students that weren't allowed into the public schools there.
Yes.
And there was a lot of riots in Little Rock, Arkansas. Now here I am going to Little Rock, Arkansas. But I was young, fearless, and I said, okay, this is where you want to send me, and this is where I'm going. I got to Little Rock, Arkansas, and of course I sat there, people would just look at me. Not too many people sat. I had a waiting time before my next flight was going to take me back to Michigan, and it started pouring rain. And the time my flight came in to take me back, it was pouring rain, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to get soaked. A young white boy came into the waiting room and said, ma'am, I don't want you to get wet. I'm going to take you to the airplane. Well, I think about that today and tears come to my eyes because I never thought that this would happen in Little Rock, Arkansas. But I also had...
It comes to my eyes too, or they come to my eyes because it speaks to the American spirit that even when, you know, we expect, you know, the worst because of what history has shown us, you know, God always sends his angels, you know, and he addressed you as ma'am, not girl. Ma'am, I don't want you to get wet. And
I was just so comforted by the way he approached me and the fact that he would even come with an umbrella so I wouldn't get wet. That was amazing. And I had that gave me a little confidence in traveling south, which was a mistake. I had a 3-day trip to Alcoa, Tennessee.
Let's talk about Tennessee. I want to hear about the ride, baby. That's what I want to get to.
I went to Alcoa, Tennessee, and the director of operations, when I arrived, he really nice. He said to me, Pat, my wife and I would like, if you don't mind, you're welcome to stay at my home. And I'm saying to myself, you know, by now I've got a little confidence in myself going south from this little rock thing. So I'm okay now down south, I think.
Was it a white man?
Yes, he was director of operations, definitely. And so I stayed with the crew at this Joy Motel. Now this was a 3-day trip, so I was there for 3 days. And one morning,
you stayed at his house or no?
No, I stayed at the motel with the rest of the staff.
Okay.
Yeah, I figured, you know, I was a flight attendant. I'm going to go stay where the rest of the crew stays. So I stayed at this Joy Motel. And one morning, this maid walks into the door. She was white. And she just looked at me with this southern drawl. And she said, ma'am, this must be your first time here. I said, yes, ma'am. I mean, I didn't even give it any thought as to what was going on. I met one of the black workers, and he would take me into the town with the black folks so I could go have my grits and stuff. And then he would bring me back. I had no idea what was going on at this Joy Motel. So after 3 days, I left and I went back to Michigan, and I got a phone call that I had caused a riot in Alcoa, Tennessee. It appears that the Joy Motel had outbid a hotel in Alcoa, Tennessee for crew stays. The hotel spread the word that the Joy Motel had integrated. So it broke out in a riot. Capital Airlines called me on the phone, and they were very, very angry with me that I stayed in this white motel. And they very, very arrogantly said to me, in the back of your logbook, when you travel south, there are hotels you are supposed to stay in. I never noticed it. They never told me. Because you have to understand, they were very careful on how they address situations so that it wouldn't sound racist. But now they had no choice. So from there on in, whenever I traveled south, security would meet me at the airplane. They didn't even give me a chance to get to the gate. They would meet me at the airplane and take me in their cars to black motels in the south.
How did you get along with the other flight attendants? How were you received among them? I know you said they were not your friends. Was it just not?
Well, you know, I was just very careful of my socialization. When I first started flying, you know, they would ask me, you know, who's paying me? Is the NAACP paying my salary? Are they paying for my hotels? And then they would look at me and they would say, oh, you must be based in New Orleans. You have a beautiful tan. I went through a lot of things. I had a passenger. A passenger got on the plane and he was very polite. And he said to me, oh, he says, you must be from Northern India. And I very politely said, no, sir, I'm from Northern Africa. Well, this man almost passed out. I mean, if you could have seen the reaction that this man had, because when I said Northern Africa, he almost passed out, almost passed out. And I had passengers on a plane. Let me tell you, I was flying on a DC-3. We were going up north. And I was on this DC-3. And this white man said to me, ma'am, he said, would you please come sit with me when we go on takeoff? And I said, I'd be very happy to. So once we took off and I sat down next to him, he held my hand tightly and he started talking to me and he said, have you ever been to Montana? And I said, no, sir, I've never been to Montana. He said, the grass is so green, the trees are beautiful. He said, no niggers and no winos. This is the kind of thing.
No.
Pardon me?
I heard the first, but no N-words and no what?
He said there are no niggers and no winos in Montana.
No
he was telling me how beautiful Montana was. And there were no niggers and no winos. Now, this is the kind of attitudes I had to confront. And because I knew, you know, the average young person my age, and I go off, but no, I could not go off. I would not go off because I didn't want to respond to any of these situations in a way that would be called arrogant or not being able to handle the position. My intent was to be certain that no mistakes were made on my part, even human being mistakes, nothing. I became sort of a robot that did everything right. I was not going to destroy this opportunity for another Black young lady. And so some of the incidents that I occurred, I remember going up to, I think it was Milwaukee, and the motel where we stayed was like isolated. And when I was walking toward the motel, there were these men standing with these cans of fire, and they were asking me, who are you and where do you think you're going? I remember locking the door in my room, putting the chair, I was so nervous. I remember putting the chair, you know, under the doorknob, and I would lock the door. I thought I locked the door was open, I was going crazy. And that was a difficult night. I didn't sleep too well that night, but I didn't socialize that much because I was nervous. I had a good-looking captain now. I remember now I'm 20, I had a good-looking captain. And he kept asking me to go out. And I would make excuses. We would fly to New York and he'd say, don't go home. Just tell your mom you're staying with us down at the hotel. And I would do everything I could to avoid this gorgeous man. He was just gorgeous, you know? Right. I would have dated him if I wasn't in this situation, but I couldn't do anything in that situation, you know?
So there were some people who probably assumed you were ethnically ambiguous to some because they didn't understand that the one drop rule basically meant that Black people we could be beautiful, dark complexioned people. We go to the whitest of the white because of the different levels of European blood, Native American blood, or whatever that we have in us. So was that the extent of, so you were saying the passengers, did you ever have a passenger that didn't want you to serve him or her because they figured you were not?
No, I never had that problem. But the ironic thing was, I remember a little girl, she looked at me and she said to me, my mommy has somebody home like you. And I laughed and I said, here you are, a 5-year-old, and you know I'm a Negro. You know I am Black. She said, my mommy has somebody home like you. And it was just amazing, you know. Passengers would look at me. I just did my job. You know, it was an amazing experience. The most rewarding part was that I opened the doors.
Yeah.
This was the most beautiful aspect of it. That we as Black people, I tell young children, I love to talk to youngsters. If you have a goal, you don't let anything block that goal. You keep your focus because there's nothing you cannot do if you want to do it and you continue on that path. You can do anything you want to do. There's always a way around. Never think that you're not beautiful. Never think that you're not handsome. Never ever think that you cannot do and carry out your dream. Because
Absolutely.
you can. You know?
And you lived it. I mean, you opened the door and now we have thousands of African-American flight attendants because of the door that you walked in. You've been honored so many times. But before we discuss the honors and the Library of Congress experience you had, you know, one of the people you opened the door for was for my Aunt Jacqueline Jaquette Williams, and that's whom I met you through. You know,
yes.
She started the Black Flight Attendants of America, I believe, in 1970, and she's been flying for over 50 years.
That's right.
For meeting you, and I have a picture of the time we were together. I'm going to go show it right now.
Okay.
In New York, it was September 11th, I'm going to show that picture right now. And it's on my PowerPoint screen, but I don't care. Voila. That is, I'm going to show a couple of pictures. So there's a picture of us in New York.
There we are.
Yep, that was September 11th, 2011. And that was in Newark. Remember that day?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Do you want to tell the audience why we came together that day?
That was during Black History Month.
No, that was September 11th.
Oh, that was the September 11th. Okay.
We did go do Black History Month too, but I know September 11th we came together to commemorate the flight crews who perished on 9/11.
That's right. I remember that.
And there you are on the far left, and there's Aunt Jacqueline Jaquette Williams, and there's her sister-in-law Keith, and then there I am, 30, 40 pounds.
All right.
There's you. There you are.
Okay.
In the chapel.
Okay, that was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. My baby was 1 year old, and then that's you and Aunt Jacques.
Okay.
I want you to tell me about meeting Aunt Jacques and what it has meant to you to be such a light for Black flight attendants.
Okay, my daughter had done some research, and she found out about the Black Flight Attendants of America. Mm-hmm. And I met Jackie Jaquette Williams, who was the president and the head of the Black Flight Attendants of America. And I would like to say this because I have to give her all the credit that I can give anyone for keeping this event, the history of Blacks in aviation, alive. It's so sad that our history is so buried. It is buried. And if it wasn't for Jackie, I would have been an absolute hidden figure. The plight of Blacks in flight would have never been known. And so I thank Jackie. I think of her all the time. I mention her because if it was not for Jackie, I don't know when anyone would have known the plight of Blacks in flight during that time.
Absolutely. And because of her, you know, I met my dad at 19, so she's a cousin technically, but she makes me call her aunt because she's so much older than I am.
Right. I know that. I know about that.
To be on the board for Black flight attendants, and over the years, I've had a chance to fly all over the place to speak at different events on their behalf. And it was an honor to speak at the Bessie Coleman breakfast in Atlanta, Georgia, when I was pregnant with my son. Remember, I spoke for the first African-American flight crew of women, composed a poem for them, and meeting you, I mean, was just the icing on the cake. I mean, and then Diane Hunter, who was the first African-American flight attendant for Continental Airlines, who lives in California. Tell me about the times you've been honored, because you've been honored several times.
Oh my goodness. Jackie and the Black flight attendants, I think, was the first time I was honored in 1999 at an OBAP, the Office of Black Aerospace Professionals, at one of their conventions. Oh my God, I can't remember everybody. I was honored also. I'd like to say this, American Airlines is very instrumental in keeping this history alive as well. I was invited by them. I was invited. American Airlines did a film. They also invited me to an event I think it was in Georgia several years ago. I was inducted into the Black Aviation Hall of Fame in August of 2010. And just recently, about a year ago, I was interviewed by the History Makers, and their oral interview is now in the Library of Congress. Yeah. So that's just a few of the things that I've done.
I think that you should be honored by several more people. I mean, you are a hidden figure in aviation, and you know, what advice do you give to the young lady who is watching this, who dreams of flying? Maybe she wants to be a pilot, or maybe she wants to be a flight attendant, and you know, she might not have the confidence that is required, but she thinks she wants to do it. What do you say to her, being the first?
Well, you know, when I get on a plane, I see a black flight attendant. We have now black pilots that we never had before, and it's just amazing. OBAP did an event once, and I saw these black pilots in the audience. I mean, tears came to my eyes. It was just amazing because the first black pilot, Marlon Green, he had to fight for the job. They had to fight for the job. And I just want to acknowledge, because our history is so hidden. There are black women who have applied for airline jobs prior to me, who have filed. But you know, the key is that people did not know that blacks in flight were not hired. People did not know. So a black young lady who would go for the job and the airline would say, well, you don't qualify for this or for that, the person may never have known it was not this particular thing that you didn't qualify for. You didn't qualify because you were black. I've been trying for a long time to get Schumberg or an organization to do a history of blacks in aviation. It began with Bessie Coleman in 1924. She could not even get a pilot's license in New York. There is a history. We have a history, and I'm not the history. The history has begun in 1924. There are others who could share their plight, such as Marlon Green, who was the first black pilot. There's just so much for people to know. And this is a problem. Our history is hidden. Our history, we as black people don't even know our entire history. Research has brought up a lot that we don't even know, and you read it, you look at it. I mean, look how many young people knew about Tulsa and the murders of those black people. Over 300 blacks murdered who were doing well in Tulsa. We don't know these stories. We don't know our history. I want our history to be brought to light, the history of blacks in aviation. I have a very good friend. She's a film writer and producer, Aaron Von Dawkins. She has written a script to do a movie on my experience in the airline industry. It hasn't come to, it needs time and it needs work, but she got an award on the script. She's an excellent writer, so she's been working on this. Aaron is in California right now. So, and you know, we have several books that have been published that I'd like to share with people to purchase. We have the book called Jet Sex by Victoria Van Tuck. She talks about the airline stewardesses and the making of an American icon. She discusses it from the time it began up until the date she published the book. There's also Casey Grant's Star in the Skies, which is an amazing book. She discusses the history, her childhood, and what led her to want to become a stewardess. And she also discusses many of the experiences that airline hostesses had on Delta Airlines. So those are two books I would recommend to read to get some background on the history of blacks in aviation.
Well, I want to speak it into existence. There should be a movie about you, just like we have the hidden figures of NASA. We should have the hidden figures, of the airline, industry of you. I mean, we should have a movie about your life and your fight. I love your spunk. I love your chutzpah. And that was one thing I loved about you when I first met you. I mean, you kept us laughing. You're so full of spunk. And I thought, oh my gosh, I want to be this woman. I love her. So, I mean, meeting you was such a treat. And Jacques didn't even tell me. I just popped up in Newark, and then voila, there you are. And I'm like, oh my God, who is this woman? She's so funny. You didn't have any airs. You were just Pat, and Jacques was like, she's the first. She was the first one to fly for a commercial airline. I was like, humility is so refreshing.
Thank you so much. Life has been wonderful. I have two wonderful kids and 7 beautiful grandchildren.
Your daughter's a principal, right?
My daughter's a principal, and my son is in finance, and a very brilliant young man in finance, if I must say. And my daughter's a wonderful principal. I have 7 grandchildren.
School, like a public school in New York?
She's at charter school in Astoria, Queens. Our
Okay.
rural neighborhood, yes. And she's in Astoria. And I have a great family. And I'm just truly blessed to have a wonderful family like this. And 7 beautiful grandchildren. I mean, they just keep me going. But I've been very blessed too in terms of my health. I'm in the martial arts. You mentioned my black belt, and I had gotten my black belt from Kashenda, who's Lamar Thornton, Master Kashenda.
Mhm.
And then I'm doing now the Tai Chi arts. I'm an advanced student with Master Abdul Musawir. And I just love it. It just sort of keeps me going. And I'm doing the Chinese bow, and they're laughing, and they're saying, we were supposed to have an event this past April, which is Tai Chi J, on the last Saturday around the world, but we couldn't have it because of COVID-19. And they keep teasing me and saying, you're about the oldest woman and maybe the only Black woman and the oldest woman doing this Chinese bow. So they couldn't wait to get me out there, this past April. Now we're still in training, and they're laughing. And of course, I'll be a little older next April. So
That's
God
okay.
willing, I'll still be able to do it.
Baby. So tell me something, before we wind down and discuss the current events that are happening racially, because I wanted your perspective on those things. What are some of your beauty secrets, girl? Because they say black don't crack, and you are the proof. Look at you. And white's all right too. Take care of yourself. But look at you, look beautiful. What are some of your
Yeah.
what do you put on your face? Like, what do you do?
Just try to keep calm. Try to keep a positive attitude about things. I've always tried to teach my you don't keep things in, you talk about it. There are no secrets anybody should have. You need to talk about them because that frees you. The illnesses and the sicknesses come from keeping things inside. You don't need to keep inside. People don't realize this stuff works on your organs, girl.
What do you put on your face, though? What's your daily regimen?
I'm crazy about that.
Vitamin E oil, what is it?
Girl, let me tell you something. I don't spend any money except on facial creams, eye creams. But wait a minute, none of them really get rid of the bags. But you keep buying them anyway because you think maybe one might work, But I guess they keep your face moisture or something. I don't know, but I love it. I spend my little extra money on body creams. I love face creams and things like that. It's fun.
Is there a brand that you recommend, a certain brand that you recommend for face cream?
Anything. I read somewhere in one of my health books that those creams must have retinol in them to be, to work right. But I try different things, and for Christmas presents, the kids all bring me body creams, eye creams, face creams. This is what I like. I have fun with that stuff.
I'm sure lots of water. They say black don't crack, but I say it can rack. Raccoon. I watch my eyes for dogs. I don't like the raccoon, little girl. I'm trying to, wait. So we talked a little bit.
Lancome has great stuff, but it's very, very expensive. Lancome has great stuff. It's very expensive. But then you can buy, I love Lancome. I treat myself to Lancome every once in a while. I love
Lancome. C'est un produit français. It's a French product. The French are experts at all that stuff. Tell me, we were talking a couple of weeks ago because I was updating the Black Flight Attendants, I guess, archive or file of history. We were documenting, your story. And that's when I said, oh, would you please let me interview you? And then the conversation kind of evolved, and we talked a little bit about what's happening right now with social justice. And you shed some light on your thoughts that you were happy to see the young people. Tell me what it's like sitting at home watching these protests, the nonviolent ones, the protests, seeing people fight and speak out. What does that mean to you? What do you want the young people to know who are out there fighting? Because you said so many thought-provoking things to me that morning on the phone.
Well, the death of George Floyd put the icing on the cake. It wasn't just him. Look how many prior to him who have been murdered. Black lives do matter, but I'm going to say this one thing. We also have to learn that Black lives matter to us. Black lives matter to us as well, and we need to look at that. I'm proud that the marches, I like the fact that it's become all over the world, and people are finally realizing the problem. But they knew a long time ago. Europe knew a long time ago. My insight into some history. Russia used to talk to America and talk about America's corporate racism. So it's not just something that has begun or that the world didn't know, but I certainly appreciate the support from all over the world. It's time. Black Lives Matter, but we must continue our fight. We need to continue. We can't just say, okay, this is done once this is over, and nobody says anything and nobody does anything. Martin Luther King protested, and we let it die out. Black people need to fight for their rights in a respectful manner. We need to do that because Black lives do matter. And I certainly look at my grandchildren and many other Black children going to college, and coming out, having trouble finding jobs. I want them to find the jobs that they deserve because of the studying and hard work they put in their education. We need to teach our young people. We need to get these young kids off the street. We need to do something for those that don't have the opportunity, that some of our young children come from families that can afford to do this, or to give them the advice they need. We need to develop more little schools, clubs, and things for our Black children to show them that they can also succeed. They can succeed as well. I want them to realize that they're just as capable as anyone else to obtain their life goals. And this is what we need to work on.
Yes, we did. And I'm going to watch this video probably about 5 times. I'm going to watch it about 5 times. This is like a moment in history for me. This is something I want my children and my grandchildren to watch with pride, to know that mama and grandmama, big mama, whatever they're going to call me, interviewed the first African-American flight attendant for a commercial airline. And these are the words that she had to say. They can look at you as a beacon of light and hope. How did you endure the things you endured and not wind up bitter? You seem to have a love for all people. How did you not end up bitter?
You know, I grew up in a very, very proud Black family. The Noisette history, the Noisette family were beautiful family, and I got a wonderful background. We were proud of who we were. We had good families. My father was the first Black customs inspector in the United States of America.
Wow, I meant to make sure we mentioned that. First Black customs inspector in the U.S. history.
Yes, he was.
Your family.
Pardon me?
You have two firsts. You're the first, your daddy's the first?
Yes, and I have a great-great-uncle, Louis Gregory, who was the first Baha'i in the United States. And the Baha'i focuses on racial equality around the world. He was appointed by Baha'u'llah to be what they call a hand of the Baha'i. He introduced my uncle, Louis Gregory, to a white woman, Aunt Louise. They married, and they traveled the world practicing racial equality. So I have the background of strong Black men and women in my family. They gave me what I needed as a young woman, to be proud of who I was, to be strong, and to follow my goals, and to just do what I had to do as a young Black woman. My father always preached education. It was back in the day where high school was not an option. He would say, you got to graduate from college. My sister and I laugh about that all the time. You know, we listened to something, we went to school, and we're self-sufficient, so that helps a lot. But there's so much more we have to open up. The corporate world needs to open up to Blacks. But the thing is, I think we need to work on our young children. That is my focus, and that would be my goal, is to focus on them so they can have a rewarding life in the future and be comfortable with who they are and live a life they deserve.
Yes, a life they deserve, because so many of our people did not get the lives they deserved. And so it's up to us to, you know, we are their dreams manifested, you know. So I have thoroughly enjoyed myself with you, and I want to bring you back I want to come back with you, Don Jock, and Diane Hunter, because there's so many we didn't talk about. What's next for you? I mean, what other, we'll close on that. Because you're so full of life, you're so vivacious. What's next? You got the Taekwondo under wraps. Do you have any new hobbies you want to pick up? I mean, what's your typical day like? And what are you reading? I mean,
well, right now on the COVID-19, there isn't very much I can do. My kids sort of kept me confined for a little while, but a couple of times I snuck out. I have my grandson here, who's a wonderful young man. He's working from home, Stefan, and he would sleep a little late because he didn't have to get up. I would sneak out at 6:30 in the morning and go do the grocery shopping. By the time he woke up, the food was put away, and I would sit down like I never moved. I think they trust me a little bit going out now. They realize that I cannot stay in, but I wear my mask and I wear my gloves and I try to stay protected. But basically now I'm just studying the arts and being there for my grandchildren. Like I said, I have, little Faith and Freddie, they're 11. Stefan is 25. Then I have Brittany, she's 23. Then I have Amina, she's I think around 21. Then I have another my youngest, Mumu, she is going into pre-med. And then I have Queta. So I have 7 wonderful grandchildren. And I just, right now my focus is on hoping and praying that they do fine. They're doing wonderful so far. They have a great dad. Faith and Freddie are 11. They're my daughter's little ones. They're twins. And they're so cute. And I just miss having them come over, and spend time. I miss babysitting and things like that. So I just thank God every day that I'm blessed. I don't want to hear people complaining when they have a roof over their head or food in their refrigerator. We are blessed, and we just have to cope and deal with the situation and pray that others stay as safe as we're trying.
Amen. And I'll close with, I hope to be back in New York at some point so we can run around like we did when we were there and I was there. We had a time that day going in out of shops, went to the M&M store. I mean, I just hope we get to return to normalcy at some point and I get to see you again. So
yeah, that would be great. I miss being around Jackie and a lot of the girls, Louise in California, Diane. We used to have so much fun.
So I will be in touch and I thank you so much for appearing on the Shanwag Show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you and God bless you, Pat.
Thank you. The same to you and the family. Stay safe.
Yes. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.